Hello, and welcome to Ask John. I'm not sure about this show. It might not be Ask John. We'll see. You'll see a title in a minute, and we'll know what this show is exactly. The show might be called Healing the Political Divide. And I'm here today with Rich Friesen, and I'll introduce him in a moment. But we are going to talk about the political, social situation that we seem to be in right now. We'll go over the history of that a little bit. Is it worse today than it's ever been? Have we ever had times like this before? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the current situation. Rich has a great graphic paradigm that he likes to show, and you'll get to see that. And I think maybe the most important thing is, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And what can we do about it? And how can you heal the political divide? Rich Friesen, I've known Rich Friesen for many years now, and Rich is a, Rich has a master's degree in clinical psychology and a neurolinguist, I can't even say it, Rich, neurolinguistic programming certification. Rich is a pretty smart guy. He uses his smarts to teach traders how to trade. And if anybody knows what I do, you know that we're kind of on the opposite side of this investment paradigm, right? But we're really good friends anyway, and we started talking about what's going on in the social, political world a year or so ago, and we decided we'd like to share our conversation with you. I think you'll enjoy it. Rich, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, what I really like about what you said is we're going to share our conversation, and that's what this is. This is a conversation into places that are pushing the edges of both of us. We're looking to define the problems, and we're exploring with solutions. So if everybody has a little patience with us while we kind of push these edges and explore. So my background is in psychology. I started out as a family therapist. I moved to the floors of the exchanges in Chicago, developed my own trading firm. And now I'm working with traders who want to expand their mental game, so professional money managers, hedge fund managers, and individual traders. But what I
and you work with individual traders?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I just want to get this little jab in, you know what my advice is to individual traders.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right, good.
Go ahead and jab away.
No, I don't. My advice is don't. Don't.
Well, is that because 95% of active traders lose money, John?
That could be a big part of it, yeah.
A small part. Well, good advice.
Yeah.
So what I've done lately is I'm working with people to expand their consciousness and their relationship with money. And that started, kind of teed off a conversation that we had that led into this political divide and the anger and the angst, and that a lot of people are experiencing. I know people, and maybe you two do too, whose Thanksgivings have never been the same.
Yeah.
I mean, there are families who are literally not talking to each other. This is, every time you turn on the radio or the TV or read the paper, there's people that just get that shot of adrenaline and anger. It's not good for health. It's not good for our communications. And if there's one word I use in my work with my clients, it's rapport. And rapport with ourselves, our internal dialogue, rapport with others, and in the financial world, rapport with the markets and finances. So that brought us to the conversation, and it led to some interesting places. So I'm interested in continuing this with you.
It's been fun, and it's going to continue being fun. This could turn into a whole series of shows called Healing the Political Divide. One thing I've thought is maybe we need to invite people in to express their opinions.
Yeah.
There's lots of opinions out there, and it might be a little risky, but I think it could be pretty important.
Since when you and I avoided risk.
What did you? I think you said something about risk. Oh yeah, we say something about risk. That's the way to get the best return, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, over the long term. It's the short term that causes us grief.
Yeah. What I've discovered is that the differences and the dynamic between the differences with people with really good hearts, that out of those differences and out of that conflict, often some beautiful things arise much more than if we just agree with each other and we just are in our own echo chamber talking about what we agree with.
That's great. You're an easy man to disagree with. Thank you.
Push back anytime, John.
So, what, in your opinion, what is our, and by the way, I guess maybe the disclaimer here is that we're only expressing our opinions. Do you consider yourself an expert on the political scene? I certainly don't.
No, what I am and what I see is process. And what I see is the human condition, and what I see is relationships. And that's where I really want to focus on, and how can we improve our internal landscape? How can we be happier and more joyful as people?
So what is our condition right now? What's going on? What's the situation?
Well, a lot of us are triggered into our survival mode. And our survival mode takes precedent over everything. Our survival mode sees the world in black and white. And as a result, we've all moved, many of us have moved to our survival characteristics and our survival mode. We've downshifted our brain down to the limbic system, and much like fight or flight or freeze, we've got into those conditions. And as a result, we're relating to each other from that place. And as a result, we've seen the increasing political divide. And I know that when I spoke at Rotary, how many years ago, we talked about the political divide then and how it was increasing. And I don't know if anybody out there feels like it's gotten any better since then, but I doubt it.
I kind of doubt it. There's this thing that we call recency bias. I think we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But I think the point to be made is that it is as much a social problem as it is a political problem. I mean, the politics is what we're talking about, but the feelings are so incredibly personal.
They are, yeah. And that's what I think where we can make real progress. If we move and get a higher level look at the different political positions. One of the things I do with my clients is I always invite them, continually invite them to their highest self. And that's a self that is aware of all the emotional processes, it's aware of their thoughts, it's even aware of their physiology and how they're holding their body. And out of that awareness, we can then say, we can view that from a higher level. And eventually, it's almost moving to a spiritual position of continually looking at the world and ourselves from our highest level. And that's where my invitation always is. And I think that if we can do that and we can forward that conversation to invite people to their highest level, I think that might be a not only feel good, but get us to our goals.
I picture this venting session. I think that's not what you're talking about, but that's what a venting session where people get a chance to just let it out.
Well, that's
so
not a
many people
bad
need to
thing.
do that. Yeah.
When my clients are really upset about something, I say, let's stand in our upset place. And it might be in a different chair, a different room, or even different location in the house. You step into that, and you just really let yourself be upset. I mean, you just say all the things, you think the thoughts, you go into it, and you exaggerate it until you're so tired of it, you say, okay, I'm ready to be done. And then you step out. So again, we're not trying to repress feelings or repress our thoughts, but let's experience them from our higher level. And when we do it intentionally, what that does is that starts to raise us up, because I'm intentionally stepping there. That means I can intentionally step out.
Right. What you can do, you can undo.
That's right.
So tell me a little about the history of this political divide. Is this something new?
Well, I'm not a historian, as you well know. But if you just look at history, there are times when our country has just been torn apart. I mean, the biggest tear apart was the Civil War. And 600 and some thousand people died on the battlefield, plus kids growing up without parents, plus and all the pain and
brother
angst.
Against brother. We can think of, I mean, I often think about it as a geographic thing, you know, so you have North and South, and we don't have North and South so much currently, but it was brother against brother even then. Yeah,
it was brother against brother, and you know,
We're
what torn us apart.
near that kind of pain.
Yeah, we're not, yeah, we want to put this kind of pain in perspective.
Yeah.
So maybe we don't take it quite as seriously.
I hope so. I hope we don't get anywhere near that. And you've shown me some charts about how Congress has voted, and I remember seeing a scatter chart. I think maybe we might be able to put that up, but tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, what we've seen is, in terms of voting along party lines or not, that Congress in the 50s, there was a huge overlap, that both parties were looking at issues, members looked at issues, trying to figure out what's best. And there was a huge overlap between the Republicans and the Democrats. And then if you take a snapshot, 10 years later, 10 years later, 10 years later, those start to separate to where it is now. There's almost no overlap at all, that either you are on one side or the other side. And that, again, I believe comes down to we are downshifted into our survival mode, and we are grouping into tribes. And we're seeing it's our tribe surviving or their tribe surviving. And it's a very, very primitive brain reaction. But we're human, and we have these primitive lower parts of our brain, and I believe they're kicking in across the country.
How does that happen? How did we get there?
If we feel threatened, we drop down into our survival brain and our limbic system. And originally, politics, there was a huge overlap. There wasn't a lot of changes that politics could do for us or do to us or with us. That there were differences of opinion of how we spent our money, where our priorities were, how to legislate. But now it's literally, taking over our life. Our healthcare system, which is so vital to all of us, has now become very political. Our educational systems, how we form them, how we create them, how we fund them, is again very political. Our taxing system, who gets what, has become very political. So everyone is now looking to Washington, D.C., to the different states, to defend themselves, to survive, because we've moved the centers of power from local governments and local communities to centralized in Washington. And as a result, for good or for bad, and I'm not making any debates here, or I'm not trying to make a debate here, but I'm saying that when somebody else has a big impact on your life, and even not only the quality of life, but the life itself in our healthcare system, we get really interested and we drop down into our survival mode and we feel threatened.
It does kind of come into our day-to-day life in that regard, and that is something new. We've talked about this thing we call recency bias, and we think that because things are so bad right now, that it's so bad now, we forget how bad it was before.
Right.
But a piece of what you're talking about is not so much the recency bias, it's actually a shift in our political structure, in our governing structure. But let's talk a little bit about the recency bias. Do you remember hanging chads? Hanging chads.
I do.
Hanging chads. Before the Bush-Gore debacle, no one knew what a chad was.
Right.
Now we know about dimpled chads and hanging chads.
Right.
And some younger people listening might not might not know what we're talking about. But how bad was it then compared to now? What do you think?
I think that it was the forerunner of what's going on now. It's the reason those hanging chads were so important.
This was the close call in the Bush-Gore election, where Florida voted almost evenly. I think the difference was a half a percentage point, or even less. And so they were going back and looking at the actual ballots, and there was a punch cards, and some people didn't push hard enough and didn't punch through, and so they left chads hanging there, or dimples in them, and then they had to decide, well, did they intend to vote for that person or not? And they counted them all kinds of different ways.
Right, and the intensity around that, I think, again, is a reflection of the underlying survival mechanisms that everyone feels, how important it is that their particular point of view come to the rescue. And both of them have real positive intent, no matter what we're looking at political side. I think if I look at my friends on the conservative side, on the progressive or liberal side, on the libertarian side, and I look at their hearts, and this is a select group, people who are my friends, of course. I don't generally hang around with evil people. But,
Hope not.
well,
yeah, I think you consider me one of your. Yeah,
I think you've made the grade, John.
Okay, good.
But they have good hearts. They have a different perspective on life, but they have good hearts, and I feel that intently. So even having these good hearts, they end up in these very strong emotional situations because they all feel threatened.
Yeah, I've heard people say, I can't talk to those people. I've heard that more than once in the last year or so. Can't even talk to them. I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to even hear what they have to say. It's just an awful thing to hear, and it's awful for both parties. I mean, no one wants to be not heard, and no one wants to have the feeling of that anger, or I'm not sure what that feeling is. It's anger? Is it anger? Is it? You talk about survival. It sounds like the survival thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
In fact, let's take a moment and really look at where we're going with this conversation.
So, I'd like you to get onto, you have this thing that I call Rich's political triangle paradigm.
Okay, well, that takes care of that.
Yeah. Can we get into that?
Sure. What I've noticed is that there are, and this is really a gross discussion without a lot of details. So there's a lot of distinctions that we're just going to kind of lump together for it. But what I see is three emotional states. And the three emotional states create our reactions. They filter the information we get, the newspapers we read, the TV shows we watch, because nobody wants their emotional state threatened. We all want to be able to get the information that supports it. So what I've done is, in looking around, what I see is there's an emotional state that we can label as progressives or liberals, and that has to do with fairness and justice and rights, equal rights. And a good heart here, the people that have a real good heart, see the injustice in the world, they feel that pain, and as a result, anything that they feel is going to threaten those people who are left out, those people who have gotten the shaft, those people who are racial minorities or sexual gender issues, that they really want to stick up for them. These progressives have just a good heart. So anything they see that threatens it immediately sends them into their survival mode. If we look, and I'm going to label the progressives red just because I'm so used to having conservatives being blue, that political party thing is I'm not going to deal with it. So then we have the conservatives here. And where's their heart? Where's their goodness? Is they want to see a moral order. They want to see moral structure. And they feel that that's the best way that people can survive. And their fear is chaos. So what they want to see is a moral order. And what their fear is a breakdown of moral order going into social chaos. And anything that they see that moves in that direction is going to be a real threat. Now, we have 1/3 of the triangle. And I'm going to identify myself emotionally here. And I'm going to bring up a point that these are emotional states. We're going to talk about the rational part of them later. But these are emotional states, and this is the libertarian point of view. And what is our concern here? It's personal freedom.
Personal freedom from what?
From oppressive government, from rules, regulations, anything that stymies their personal choice and their relationships. So this is where I am emotionally. But if I say, this is where I am emotionally, then what I'm doing is I'm stepping into my higher self and saying, this is Richie's emotional condition. If a conservative were to say, you know, that's my emotional base, that's where I just really care. Or if a progressive or liberal will say, this is my emotional base. Now, we can all get together and we can say, hey, where's your emotional base? Oh, my emotional base is in moral order. My emotional base is in fairness and justice. My emotional base is in my personal freedom.
So where do you think people, the average person, if you asked them where they are, showed them that, would they know? Would most people fit somewhere in the middle? Would they shift back and forth? What is this a solid structure?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So we have most people are somewhere, they'll flow. I mean, this is not a fixed dynamic for most people. That with age, with time, you know, we tend to think of the young people up here. We tend to think of the older, more established people here. We tend to think of the free thinkers, and those are loosey-goosey over here. But during the life, we'll shift. You know, for example, AU H2O 64, Goldwater in 64. I was in high school. I was a Goldwater Republican. I was conservative. And then I went to college near Chicago, and I taught daytime relief school in the inner cities of Chicago. I went from here, screaming in a millisecond, to over there.
Yeah.
Because I saw, when I took 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds to the park, I would cross the street at the wrong place and they would step into another gang territory. The emotion. They were terrified for their lives. And I said, in America, this should not be. And I went up to here. I went up to there in a heartbeat. So we can all move around. We can all shift depending on the issue. But if we can say and identify where we are at any given point, what this does is we're now looking at ourselves from a higher order and from our higher selves.
And where does the power come? And you've talked about the power. Where does that come in?
Okay, so yes. So let's go take everything to an extreme. If we take the conservative to an extreme, and this isn't most conservatives, but we go over here, then this power is going to enforce a moral order on everybody. In other words, well, if we look at laws against gambling, commercial sexual activity, who's getting married to who, all that moral order stuff, if you take it for an extreme, that's going to legislate a moral order for everybody. That is where that power is. If the progressive goes to the extreme, and we go up, you know, up here to off the charts to the extreme, we are going to need power in order to enforce fairness, justice, equal rights. And if you look at the progressives who meld into socialism, who eventually go into more violent forms, that eventually you need force and violence to enforce this. So when this goes to an extreme. If the libertarians go to extreme, now the libertarians are for personal liberty, right? So they're not going to want to accumulate a lot of power, but what they're going to do is they're going to disintegrate a lot of our social structures if we take it to extreme in order to have this personal freedom that we have. Our brains are...
So that looks like chaos to me in the extreme. The libertarian in extreme would have no regulations, no rules, very few laws.
Right.
And that creates chaos.
And they will argue, and I think it's a good argument, that if we decentralize, that people will self-organize, that nobody wants to live in the Wild West. If you look at the Wild West and all the shoot-ups and the murders and everything, the women came, and very quickly they, you know, thank God for the feminine species, or the gender, that they quickly organized and said, this is chaos. So people are going to self-organize here. But, you know, if you take it to extreme, you go to the anarchists. Again, this is the extreme, not the libertarian here, who recognizes the value of social order.
And most people are inside those three paradigms anyway.
Yeah, and most people are somewhere
And they move around in it. Yeah.
somewhere
Yeah.
here.
Well,
So-
let's have some fun with it. I'm not sure this is fun, but let's try something out. Let's talk about political figures in the past,
Okay.
and let's have a little fun with it and place them on that
Okay.
on your map there. So let's talk about the Bushes. That's George Bush 1 and 2. So where do you put them there?
Well, if you live in this world here, you put them over here. If you live in this world here, you might put them over here. If you live in this world here, the conservative, you might put them more in the middle.
Ah, okay.
So, depending on your viewpoint. So
Okay.
everyone can form their own opinion on that.
How about Nixon?
Nixon, I think most people, and from all points of view, would put him, somewhere in the circle, not at the extreme, but somewhere in there, yeah.
Okay, and Reagan.
Reagan, I think you could put
Same
him in the middle of
Okay,
that circle.
and Carter.
Carter, probably here in the center of the progressive, liberal.
Obama.
Yeah, I think we're at the top of that
Okay.
circle.
I don't know if I want to mention Trump.
Trump.
Let's talk about Trump a little later, okay?
Okay, because I was going to say, he
What do you
defies, he broke
rips it all
my
up.
triangle.
And more.
And more,
And
yeah.
more. What political figure can you, of any success, that you can put in the libertarian spot?
Well, we can go back to Thomas Jefferson.
You have to go back pretty far.
Yeah, because the early founding fathers, they had, difference between federalism and states' rights and all that. But, they were, anywhere from here, all the way down to here. Certainly, if we look at successful, there's the Libertarian Party, but it generally
So, Rich,
generates about 4% of the vote.
not. We need to break in just a minute. We have so much more to talk about, and we really came here to talk about how to heal this awful political divide that we're experiencing in our country. And you're going to stay around, and we'll do another segment, and we'll start off here. Maybe we'll do a little recap and come into this and really get into what do we do now? What do we do now? This is an awful situation. I don't think anybody can. I don't think people can sustain this level of anger for a very long time. And I think there's some things that we can do, at least some suggestions that we have. And I think that you'll enjoy the ride. Please tune in again. We'll be back.
Thank you.